I'm a nasty woman because I am raising a daughter to believe that every part of her person is valuable.
I am a nasty woman because I am raising a son to defy what society determines as masculine, to be vulnerable and embrace his feelings, to respect all people of all races, all genders, all sexual orientations.
I'm Erin Brown.
I'm Neghar
and this is Nasty Women Radio, where today we're talking about feminism. So this is a really big topic, and we're not going to spend several hours. So we're going to touch on a lot of different talking points around feminism right now. We're not going to give any definitive answers to anything. We acknowledge that there are limitations to what we can discuss based on our own unique identities and experiences. But we also think that it's really important that we talk about this stuff without, just tiptoeing around difficult issues. It's important that we're all talking about this stuff. So we're going to dive in and maybe misstep and be open to feedback, but we want to start this conversation.
Yeah. As Erin says, we're here for the messy.
Yes.
Which I love. It's one of my favorite taglines of yours and of the world in general, because we are here for the messy, and we're here to use our personal narrative, to use our own experiences and what we've learned to help educate in a positive way. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't mean that we're not going to mess up, and it doesn't mean that we, might say something that could be construed as insensitive or offensive, but we're going to do our best not to do that.
Yep.
And we're going to do our best to talk about feminism in a way that opens up the conversation for people who maybe previously weren't clear on the term or on what all of this encompasses.
Okay. Yeah. So feminism, the basis of feminism is equality for all genders. Yeah, so there's that. A misunderstanding from the get-go is that it is putting women above men or wanting to take something from men, outside of the fact that if we are to have equal power, there will be some rearranging. But nobody's hoping to take men down a notch. Nobody's anti-men. And I guess it's not fair to say nobody, because certainly there's a person that exists of every stereotype, but feminism in general is not anti-men. In fact, feminism supports men in the way that you talked about your son, wanting him to be a fully dimensional person, and that means things that we think of as feminine need to be a part of who he is if they're a part of who he is. So feminism is inclusive. It is meant to be recognizing oppression that is experienced by women, specifically in its inception, and now by all genders, and making sure that we have equal footing, equal voice, and equal rights.
Absolutely. And I think that because feminism is in a lot of ways making a sort of resurgence, a lot of people are calling this the new wave of feminism. I hesitate to use that term because it's usually used by the opposition, but it is sort of making a resurgence. And I think that it's important for us to recognize that the reason why feminism is making such a strong resurgence is because it's now more inclusive than it ever has been. And
or it's really trying hard to get there.
Yeah, we're doing our best.
Oh my God.
We're doing our best. And I think that, because we also have the advantage of digital media, which at the inception of feminism, the feminist movement, was not something that was available to us. I think that we are reaching more folks with this movement and awakening more men, women, transgender individuals, people who identify as non-binary. There are so many more humans. Let's just say humans. There are so many more humans who are really awakening to this idea, and not just to the idea, but to the actual presence of oppression.
Right.
And I think that that's a really important conversation, because there are a lot of people who defy the idea of feminism because the understanding is that women are equal, the genders are equal, that there does not exist any oppression, that, women have the right to vote. And there are a lot of people who will argue the gender gap, the pay gap. There's a lot of opposition to this. So I know, Erin, you had some really great thoughts on that, on the idea of oppression.
Right. Well, it's something that we're not going to get into a whole lot today because each of the issues deserve at least their own hour, given the limitations of what we can do with the podcast. But you used the word the opposition, and I'm going to go ahead and join you in that. So to me, the opposition of feminism is people who believe that there is no oppression, that violence against women, sexual violence against women, disparities in pay, street harassment, all of these things are not actually inequality and can be easily explained by what is usually the failings of women. The pay gap thing is often explained by women aren't assertive and they don't go in and ask for their money. There's lots of arguments around, are women oppressed? And for the topic of this show, we're not going to do are women oppressed. We're going to work with the operating feeling that we are. And also that there are other groups within people who identify as women who are further oppressed than someone who looks like me. So we can talk about each of those subjects in and of themselves and probably will. For the purpose of today, the opposition is women and men, and the loudest I see are women. Talking about how they don't need feminism because they don't have any problems in their lives. And something Neghar and I have talked about quite a bit is how sad that is, because if it's true that you haven't experienced any misogyny in your life, if you haven't ever felt oppressed, that may be true for you. That's wonderful. So the fact that millions of women and people are marching about this oppression doesn't bother you, doesn't make you wonder about what other people are experiencing. If your only note is this isn't happening to me and so it can't be happening, that is the least empathetic thing I've ever heard of, So especially if you're somebody who doesn't understand why anyone would be talking about oppression, you're the perfect person to be listening.
Absolutely. There's a quote going around. It's an Audre Lorde quote, and Audre Lorde is a equal rights activist, poet, writer, absolutely beautiful woman. And the quote is, and you might have seen this if you consume the type of media I do, is I am not free while any woman is unfree, even while her shackles are very different from my own. And I think this is a really important distinction when it comes to feminism, because one of the arguments against feminism, particularly in America, is that how dare we stand up for women's rights in a country where women have more rights than they do in certain third world nations. Me particularly, I've been attacked as an Iranian American because I've had women attack me and say, oh, so you think Iran is so great? Women don't have rights there. And I'm just like, I can't control like the parents that I was born to. Right. I'm proud of my heritage. Does that mean that I agree with women being demeaned and demoralized and underprivileged in the country of my parents' origin? Absolutely not. So there's this argument that comes from a lot of people that say, well, we don't really have anything to be fighting for, and we do. We do. And it has and that's it. I think that's it. I think that's all we have to say.
Right.
We do.
so disinterested in discussing that particular opposition today. However, there is other critique that I wouldn't call opposition. I would call important critique amongst people who are trying very hard to align with one another right now. And that is a couple of fold. So one is that historically and present day, feminism had centered white and cisgendered, which means being born to the gender that you identify as. So white cisgendered women. And historically, factually, absolutely true, considering we really love to talk about Susan B. Anthony and women getting the right to vote. When that was white women getting the right to vote, there were suffragettes that were of different ethnicities, but that were actually like literally made to march in the back. And the women leading that used racism as a tenet for why they should get to vote, that women's votes would uphold white supremacy, and white women got the right to vote. That was something that came up in the presidential election that was jarring for a lot of reasons. So lots of well-intended, mostly white ladies put on pantsuits and voted for Hillary Clinton, and then put their "I voted" stickers on Susan B. Anthony's grave. And I get it. What was missing from all of that was that Susan B. Anthony did have very racist practices and used racism as a part of her platform, and that the year that we quote women getting the right to vote was only white women. And the other part of that is that the reason that we think that's when all women got the right to vote and Susan B. Anthony is our amazing feminist hero is because that's what we're taught. So while we're barely taught about history in a way that's inclusive of women, when it is inclusive of women, it's inclusive of white women and not a full picture.
Absolutely. And so I think that kind of brings us to our next topic. We talked a little bit about what feminism is and what feminism isn't. Again, feminism isn't the idea that women should hold power over men, or that they should cuckold their men, which is, a lot of feminist men are being called cucks in the opposition. So that is not the idea. The idea is not that women are superior to men, or that we would seek to eradicate them. But a deeper conversation about this is this idea of intersectional feminism and why that descriptor is essential to this modern movement. So the women who were putting these stickers on Susan B. Anthony's graves, while well-intended, we are operating under the assumption that it was miseducated, right? That they're misinformed. And so now that we realize this, it is our responsibility to be informed. It is our responsibility to educate ourselves and our children. And it is our responsibility as a movement to change the tenets, to change the platform, to evolve the platform, I should say. Right. And the feminist platform has evolved to what I would say majority of feminists that I've come in contact with identify as intersectional feminists. And I know that, Erin, you've got something you'd like to read on that. For me, intersectional feminism operates under the framework that we recognize the oppression of all individuals, women, genders, races, socioeconomic classes, sexual orientation, and so on, and that all of this comes together to align with the movement against oppression.
So where the term intersectional feminism came from is by a law professor named Kimberly Crenshaw, and she was studying a case of a Black woman who, during the Industrial Revolution, looking for that word, took a car manufacturer to court for discriminating against her and not hiring her because she was a Black woman. And her case was thrown out because of a lack of intersectionality, which is where she came up with this word, because the judge saw that the company that she was putting the lawsuit against had Black men working there and had white women working there. So because of that framework, there was no misogyny and there was no racism. And so that did not acknowledge that she was dealing with both. And so that's when she came up with the term intersectionality as a working framework within the law to acknowledge, in this particular instance, that a Black woman has multiple forms of oppression happening to her at once. And so you can't say white women are working here and Black men are working here, so it's not a problem. Her definition is the view that women experience oppression in varying degrees of intensity. Cultural patterns of oppressions are not only interrelated, but are bound together and influenced by intersectional systems of society, examples being race, gender, class, ability, and ethnicity. And one of the things that she has a critique of current feminism, which is interesting and super important, is expanding our notion of what gender-based violence is, not to just what is private, which is the sort of common feminist tenet that, private violence is a public problem, but to take that out of just the context of private violence against women being gender-based, but that state sanctioned violence against women, which is primarily experienced by Black women and other women of color, but specifically Black women, should be a primary thing that feminists together are fighting for. So, intersectional feminism, which basically means that we can't just think about what affects us as individuals. If we are going to be an effective movement, and if we are going to be united, which is a common concern currently with all of the questions coming up, then that means that we have to do a great deal of listening to people who experience different kinds of oppression than we do, so that we are fighting for them and not just for what we are personally experiencing.
Absolutely. So I do want to talk a little bit about the idea of patriarchy, what that really means, and why this slogan "Smash the Patriarchy" has come to be one of the major slogans that you'll see within the intersectional feminist world. I think that if misunderstood, it can further lend to this idea that feminists are anti-men. Sure. And so I think it would be a good thing for us to discuss, what the hell is the patriarchy anyway?
Go for it.
The actual dictionary description of patriarchy is a system of society or government in which men hold the power and women are largely excluded from it. That's the blanket description. And when we talk about internalized misogyny, we're going to come to find out that that is something that is very much internalized and learned in our culture that extends beyond, the government. I think we can all agree that particularly in the United States, the system of government does favor men. We still don't have a female president. And so I think that patriarchy is very much alive and well. This idea of patriarchal society in that, the men are the head. That's the idea, right? It's a male as default society. And it trickles down into the most benign, mundane possible ways, even as such that I noticed that I was doing this when I would meet another dog. It sounds like a ridiculous thing to say, but dog lovers will understand this. When you meet a dog,
you make it sound like you're a dog, though. When I meet another dog,
and I meet another dog. Okay, to be clear, let me clarify. I have 2 dogs.
Okay.
So that's another dog. Another dog outside of the ones I own. When I'm out with my dogs and we come across another dog, the default for me for a long time was, what's his name? Let me pet him. And I started to realize how internalized that was, how this male as default society trickles down into even the most benign language and associations. So that's another conversation. Should we say her? I don't know. Should we say it? I don't know either. What is your dog's name? How does your dog identify? I don't know. So this is another conversation. This is not a dog activist podcast, but the conversation around patriarchy is such, not that smash the patriarchy does not mean down with men. It means let us bring awareness to the oppression of women in this country and understand that we do not have equal rights and equal power, and that we are interested in evolving this male as default society.
Right. Well, and that's the same sort of functionality as white supremacy, which is people are less likely to want to wear a shirt about, where smash the patriarchy feels a little bit safer, I think, maybe. But white supremacy then is white as default in leadership, as default in describing a person. Like, people are less likely to say a white person. And I've heard so many white people get offended by someone describing someone as white, because that's our default. That's our default leadership. That's our default person. Yeah. And so patriarchy operates in the very similar way as white supremacy in who we're defaulting, particularly when it comes to power and leadership. So, I feel like we're in a whole bunch of different places in terms of feminism. And my 5-minute scribble of where I see a lot of people landing at the moment. Some of us don't believe in oppression. I don't know if I can reach those people. I'd really like to try to, but they probably aren't listening to Nasty Women Radio. So some of us don't believe that oppression is a thing, and that narrative goes something like everybody needs to quit crying. You can find a lot of that on alt-right websites, which, by the way, as of, is it yesterday, the former owner of the primary alt-right website is head of our national security. So while these conversations are uncomfortable and often thought even impolite, as with any political conversation, they've never been more important. So some of us believe in no oppression. It's not a thing. Some of us are all like, yay, women, and missing the fact that that is one part of a narrative that has many different voices. And so long as we just, yay, women, come with us, we're missing out on a lot of really important conversation. Third is acknowledging intersectionalism, but calling it divisive, which is coming a lot after the Women's March, where well-intended, but there's a difference between intent and impact, and that's something that's discussed a lot, which means that if I have really good intentions with what I say, but my impact is harmful, that I need to think about my impact and not just cry about my intentions. So saying that any critique of the march, for example, that just happened on Washington and throughout the world is divisive because we need to come together. That's missing in that it's not ban around the women at the front, but let's get everybody listened to and let's get on the same page so that every voice is being heard and not your voice doesn't matter right now, as in the first feminist movement. But getting on the same page means listening. And then 4, which is where I feel like I am, is trying to catch up and find my footing and realizing not only how much I don't know about various forms of oppression, specifically with gender identity is a place that I'm doing, I feel like, a lot of catching up, partially because a lot of that language is new, at least to me, and it's important to me, but I feel like I'm running to catch up. Some of that, though, is confused, and there's like guilt involved, which leads to silence, but listening is an important part of catching up. And then the 5th place being finding our footing with one another, trying to find ways to talk to one another that are effective, and realizing how much we really don't know and understand about one another. And all of this specifically is my experience as a white woman and what I see white women going through. That is not at all my understanding of what it is to be a woman of color, because I am white.
I think that the only way that this works, the only way that this whole feminist thing, this whole intersectional feminist thing works, is if we listen. So there are some critiques of the Women's March and of feminism in general that we're going to discuss. But before we can do that, we have to actually recognize internalized misogyny. We have to actually recognize that this is a real thing that is happening in the world that is so deeply embedded in our culture that we're not even aware of it. And that's what we mean when we say internalized, right? And I'm guilty of this. And I want to talk a little bit about why, again, I'm where you are. I'm catching up. As little as, I want to say maybe 8 years ago, I wrote an article. I was deeply into the kettlebell world. The Russian kettlebell certification was like a big thing in the fitness space, where you'd go, you'd get certified, you're part of this group of people who are all about strength and and it's very aggressive and hardcore. And I think that I was attracted to it because I really wanted the camaraderie that I really missed from having been in the military. And so there was this kind of really militant aspect to it because it was led by a man named Pavel, who is a Russian and has a very militant personality. And he used to say that we need to train like men, especially if we're women. And that was a catchphrase that really caught on. And I was new to this idea of empowering women through strength. And I was so excited about it that, again, well-intended, wrote an article that went viral in the fitness community called Train Like a Man, especially if you're a woman. And I'm embarrassed of that today because I recognize the internalized misogyny of that statement.
Can you define that right quick?
I'm not very good at that, but
so it wasn't a gotcha, but like, in case somebody's not familiar with that term, what do you mean by that?
So the idea of internalized misogyny is that while we might not realize that we are using misogynistic phrases, behaviors, or actions, that it's so deeply embedded in our culture that we often say and do things and feel things that operate under the umbrella of misogyny without even realizing it.
Right.
That would be my definition. I don't know if you have a better one.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's just agreement, like with your article, agreement that, men are stronger, faster, better. And so the best way to be strong as a woman is to train like a man, is the agreement that men are better in this way. And that shows up in all kinds of ways in terms of how we use our voice, in terms of, the way that we second guess everything that we do in a way that men aren't taught to do, particularly in leadership, but it is, and body image is a huge internalized misogyny. So the misogyny says, right, we have to be in a tiny box, which is different depending on your culture, but you have to be beautiful first before you can speak. And if you speak, then we're going to tell you you're not beautiful enough. And so we work really hard at that because we bought in, we agree, because it's so ingrained in us. So it's agreement to the structure as men is default, men are power, men are strong. And I think I read that article.
Yeah. And I think that we agree because we don't even know why we agree.
Right.
Like if we ever stopped to ask that question, we'd go, why? Why do I think I need to be a size 2 with 6-pack abs? Like, where did this idea come from? So questioning those ideals and where they come from is awakening this idea of internalized misogyny. So the reason I bring up this story and this article that I wrote and the fact that I got it wrong is to tell you that, like, it's okay to get it wrong. It's the recognition of that and the growth that comes afterwards that's important. I was completely unaware. I didn't even know what internalized misogyny meant. I didn't know that it existed in my life. I was really proud to write this article about why women should train for strength. And it was all well-intended, empowering women to, own their bodies and be strong. But it was under this umbrella of internalized misogyny that I speak out against now. And so I feel like it's my duty to come out and say that I got it wrong. Right. And I think that sometimes we do, and that's okay. It's nothing to be ashamed of. It's an awareness process. We're coming to this awakening. I think that people are waking up, and it took this drastic shift in America's, political landscape for a lot of people who had previously been asleep to wake up. And that's okay. There is no shame in that. There's no shame in just now waking up, but it's time to catch up. Right. And it's time to say, I'm sorry, I got it wrong because I was asleep. And now we do the work to catch up. So, hey, I got it wrong. I got it wrong. And then over the period of learning, of taking the personal responsibility to get out there, to consume different kinds of media, to learn from different people, to listen to different viewpoints, I look back on that article and I'm like, yeah, that was well intended, but it doesn't represent, no, not it. It does not represent, and I think that internalized misogyny kind of comes to play in things like strong is the new skinny. Again, well intended, sure, but again, intention versus impact.
Right. Still limiting what we're allowed to be, what's perfect. Still another thing to strive for until we're valuable. Absolutely. Something you're saying, you don't have to be ashamed. And I kind of want to speak to that because I think that's a place that a lot of people get stuck, particularly in terms of not exploring their own racism is a really good example. So for me, that's not like a singular character issue, but rather the acknowledgement that we have been conditioned in a society that holds male as default, that holds white as default, that holds cisgender as default, and heterosexual as default. All of these things are upheld and catered to. And though, even if you have the best intentions and the biggest heart and you want to believe in all people, you've got some conditioning about others to undo and some conditioning about yourself to undo. And that might come with some shame or guilt. And so I see a lot of people get stuck in the shame and guilt cycle, or even start sort of like yelling back, like, I'm not just going to feel guilty. And it's like, actually 0 people are asking you to be guilty, because that's not actionable. But I do want to acknowledge that that is, at least for me, a regular part of the process of learning. So like when I'm reading articles about white feminism, which is another term I want to throw out real quick. So white feminism is feminism that puts white women first. It does not necessarily mean all white women who identify as feminists. It means the idea that white women come first in feminism. So that's white feminism. When I read articles about white feminism, usually written by a Black woman, the honest response in my living room is guilt, and sometimes hurt feelings, like, I feel attacked, like somebody's yelling at me, and I have to really check myself, like, girl, you're sitting in your living room by yourself. No one's even talking to you or looking at you. No one's attacking you, but I have to process all of those feelings, and sometimes that means walking away for a minute and realizing I'm sitting alone in a silent room and that no one's attacking me, and come back and read again, because if I'm feeling those feelings, it means this message is for me, and it's an important thing for me to read. And it's okay for me to have to process those feelings on my own, or to find other people who get that, to sort of mess through that with, so that we can come back and listen again. And the important part about that is, 1, being willing to go through that process yourself so that you're listening, but 2, then to not take that defensiveness or guilt or hurt feelings and hand it back to the writer, hand it back to the Black woman who's saying, here's your critique, but talk about it where it belongs, because that is too much emotional work to hand over to the person who's doing the educating of you. I just read this amazing point of view about critique that I'm going to hold on to. So I think critique is really important for leadership in general, and it's certainly important for me to receive critique. So I was already there, but she said to receive critique as a compliment, because people are already emotionally drained, and if they're taking the time to critique you, they think that you can learn. Because they're not going to expend the emotional energy critiquing somebody who's too far gone. So I thought that was really beautiful too. So here you are. Yeah. We have a lot of critique, because I really do think that we can all work together and get on the same page, which means a lot of listening. And that might mean some shame, and that might mean some guilt, and that might mean feeling attacked in your living room. But it also means dealing with that yourself, not handing that emotional energy over to the author or whoever, and coming back to listen. Because if you're feeling all of those things, it's just the process of learning, and it's yours to work through, not somebody else's.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that part about criticism. I think that's amazing. I think that the unifying factor for this movement, this social justice movement, and we're talking about it from an intersectional feminist standpoint, but you might look at it from a different viewpoint. I think that the unifying factor is going to be whether or not we're willing to listen to each other. Yeah. Because a lot of the arguments coming from the opposition are that, feminism is catty and toxic. And it's, they're using terms like bitchy women and, which I actually really like the word bitch, but that's a personal preference. But
probably not when coming from a person like that.
No, because I know that it's meant as an insult. But when I see my girlfriends and I'm like, sup, bitches, I know that they're not taking it as an insult. They're like, yeah, let's go. But when they're saying that, feminism is toxic and it's bitchy and we can't even get along within our own organizations, and that's what they're using to divide us. And so I think that it's really important that we listen to each other, and particularly those of us who experience more privilege and are less marginalized. Listen, be willing to say I was wrong. Be willing to say, you know what? I don't know how to get it right. Can you teach me? Can I hear your story?
And that's another a learning point for us is, can you teach me means I need to go research the work that you've already done, because I'm seeing this a lot online. which is totally fair, is women being like, this is not my job, and you can hit up my PayPal. So well-intentioned, saying like, teach me about these things, and they're like, Google it, bitch. And that's fair. So finding the resources that are already available to you, because there's a difference between taking in what somebody is using as teaching you and demanding someone teach you about their oppression, especially when you're coming from a position of, I don't get it.
Well, they are teaching you with the work that they share, right? That is.
Exactly.
So when I say teach me, I don't mean necessarily tell the person to teach you, but open yourself up to learning.
Yeah, no, I knew what you meant, but I wanted to throw that out because it's one of those things I keep seeing, and people are like, ooh. And it's awesome. I'm actually back on Twitter for this very reason, because there's a regular practice of white women in particular coming for other white women who are saying, teach me about that. And they're like, let's leave her alone. Here's a search. Here's a Google search. Here's an article. Here's something that you can figure out yourself instead of demanding that of this person. Yeah. So this actually happened to you over the weekend. You wrote an article on Medium about so over the past weekend, Trump banned a lot of people from coming into the country, including people who had legal work or student visas, and they were detained. And this all happened. You can Google it.
You can Google it.
And you wrote a piece about how your life, as you know it, wouldn't have been possible if that ban had happened, because your father and mother had immigrated from, and specifically from countries, from Muslim countries.
Well, from a country that was on the ban list. So
So then the response to that, there was people saying that they were disappointed that you were being political, which is exactly what, that's an original feminist thing. The personal is political, right? You were just talking about your life, and it is political. We have to stop saying we're not going to talk about politics, but you were being political or divisive. What all kinds of feedback did you get from that, and what was that like?
Okay, so the important distinction here is that I do have two Facebook pages, right? My regular personal Facebook account, and then my professional account, which has several thousand followers and was created on the foundation of sharing information about fitness, nutrition, mindset, lifestyle, and so on and so forth. So when I posted that on my private page, I got 100% positive feedback, a couple hundred shares on the article, lots of people also sharing their personal narratives, which I thought was really beautiful. Excuse me, because I think that, to clarify, the piece that I wrote was a personal narrative. Yeah. It was also a call to action in that these personal narratives are more, these personal stories are more common than you think. So, when we say like ban the Muslims, think about who you're talking about, because these people are your neighbors, they're your friends, they're your coworkers, they're your kids' friends, they are among us. We are among you. So I love that a lot of the feedback was other people sharing their personal stories of immigration. But when I shared it on my professional page, I was very careful to do this. And I wanted to be as sensitive as possible to people who might come to my Facebook page to primarily learn about pull-ups. Hey, pull-ups are fucking important, okay? Like, I do the work that I do in fitness and in body image. I do this work, and I quietly, but not so much quietly anymore, do this work as an act in politics, because the obsession that women specifically have with their bodies, with our bodies, the way that we obsess over, the number on the scale and all of these things that we've been taught to worry about, that's internalized misogyny. And that obsession is a distraction. It is a distraction from the very important work that we can be doing in the world. And so the reason why I talk about fitness and nutrition and mindset and all these things around body image isn't just because of fitness. It's because it is important for us to feel safe and powerful in our bodies so that we have the energy and the bandwidth to go out and do shit that really matters. Yeah. So yes, people are accustomed to seeing more fitness and mindset, lots of really heavy mindset stuff around body image on my page. And so I published it on Medium. I didn't post it directly to the page, the full article, like I did on my private page. I published it to Medium, and I published it with a warning. if you're not interested in seeing my political viewpoint on things, you don't have to click this, was essentially what the warning was. It's like, I was like, I don't usually get political, but this is a personal story about my experience with immigration. I was fired up. I was emotional. I wrote 1,000 words in the span of 20 minutes, which is really unheard of for me. And I wanted to share it because I knew that there were some people who would want to consume that information. Most of the feedback was very positive. However, there were some people who commented on the thread. There was one woman in particular, who said, I come here for fitness information, not for politics. I'm unfollowing you. See ya. And I was like, bye. My response to that is kind of twofold. First, my personal response to that is that, like, I'm a full human being. I'm a multidimensional human being. And while I am here dispensing fitness information, I'm not a robot. I'm not a machine. And this is a personal story about my life. So I'm sorry that offended you, but not sorry. Like, that I don't know what to say to you. This is who I am. Like, if you don't like that I'm talking about my personal experiences with immigration, then you don't need to be here. Because this is my personal brand. It represents me, who I am. And immigration, my parents came here from Iran before I was born. I was born here. I grew up in a dual lingual household. I grew up with stories of immigration. And I was also, raised to be a feminist. I was never raised to believe that, women are any less powerful than men. And so I felt that was a really important distinction to make in a personal narrative. And my other response to that is, like, we are at the point in our political landscape where politics has permeated everything. It's no longer a conversation of, oh, that's political and I want to stay away from that. Because it's not about politics anymore. It's about people.
Right.
So I think we need to have that conversation, and we need to get more comfortable having those conversations.
Right. Well, and for me watching that, it just really felt like someone saying that they really liked you when you were talking about pull-ups, but not when you were showing the part of you, as though these things are separate, that you can separate them. Is like, we don't really want to hear about how you're an immigrant. We don't really want to hear about how you come from a primarily Muslim country. Like, that's political and unseemly. Whereas what if you were me and I was talking about something about being Christian and a military vet, which I'm not, but you are. If I was taking, like, that religious and political standpoint, would that be seen as divisive, or is that patriotic? Like, why is it political and divisive when you're talking about being an immigrant and you're talking about a religion other than Christianity, and not when those things are present? We don't call those things political because those are the things that we default.
I think that's a really important distinction, and I think that that's something that we need to wake up to. If you're listening and you felt like you've been primarily exposed to this one type of rhetoric, like, I'm happy that you're here. Yeah. I'm happy that you're here listening to different viewpoints and a different rhetoric. And that's really what this is all about. It's about having these messy conversations, talking about things that we've previously been uncomfortable talking about, because we need to wake up to the fact that we are living in this male as default, white as default, Christian as default society. And we need to wake up to the fact that our society is much more diverse than that, and we can talk about these political conversations without it meaning anything divisive. Because all that's missing there, when we say that these conversations are divisive, what's missing is a willingness to listen.
Right. And, if you don't have friends who think differently than you do, who challenge you about the way that you think, then seek out some voices, man. You don't have to go hang out, but they're all available on the internet. I regularly consume more conservative media, mostly because when all of the media that I consume and the people in my life are sad and terrified and really on the same page about where things are headed. I'm curious because surely we're not getting the same information. So what is happening? What is the rhetoric? What is the way these things are being discussed from another point of view? It's important to me that I understand that, even if all that does for me is strengthen the way that I communicate with people who have that viewpoint, strengthening my own argument. It doesn't even have to be to change your mind, but a willingness to see what's happening on the other side, whatever side you feel yourself sitting on, is really important. Can we talk about my favorite resource real quick?
Yes, I would love that. I actually bookmarked resources as something that we should talk about on our show because, while Erin prepares that list, I will say that I think that the most important thing we can do is consume our media from multiple resources. If all you're watching is The Daily Show, don't get me wrong, fucking love The Daily Show,
Same.
Trevor Noah, love that guy. But if all you're watching is The Daily Show, I mean, that's just as one-sided as if all you're watching is Fox News.
Right.
So let's open up to different sources of media, even if to read these different media sources or watch these different media sources and realize that you don't agree with what they're saying, because that gives you a firmer sort of platform to know where you stand. It's important. I think we live in a world, in a society where the reason why people are so uncomfortable with politics and so uncomfortable talking about feminism is because people are afraid to draw a line in the sand. They're afraid to stand for something because of who it might exclude or how they might be criticized. And so if I do have any call to action, it's to not be afraid to stand up for something, as long as you're open to learning different viewpoints.
And part of learning is critique. And it doesn't mean anybody's freaking coming for you, even if that's what you feel like sitting in your living room. It means that we're at a point in history where more than ever people are saying, you need to be listening to me too, and have the platforms and their own personal media sources to get that information out. So it really is beautiful. And even though for the opposition looking in, it looks like feminists are doing a bunch of arguing, I think we're we are people collectively having some of the most important dialogue that there is to have right now. And so that's something I want to be a part of, even if it's messy and even if it doesn't look inviting to people who don't even think that there is such a thing as oppression. This is all I'm interested in doing. So this is my favorite resource, and I just love it. So I've done 2 Facebook videos about it, but I just can't stop talking about it. So it's called The Week. My attorneys actually hit me to this. And it is the best, its term is the best of U.S. and international media. So it combines all different media sources together in one weekly magazine. It's like $50 to $60 depending on where you sign up for the whole year, and you get this little magazine. And I love the way that they cover things because it takes a lot of research out for you and gives you a lot of points from which to start. So the main stories and how they were covered is where it starts. The main story for this week, one of them is Republicans divided on Obamacare strategy. So super objective. And then it tells you what happened and just the objective facts about what happened. And then what columnists said, and then what editorialists said. And it gives you from Washington Post, from the New York Times, from the Wall Street Journal, Politico, Chicago Tribune. So it's giving different points of view on the same thing and just snippets from those articles so you can go and read more if you want to. But you're getting the facts and then the talking points from different perspectives on every single thing. The World at a Glance is pretty rad. It's a 2-page spread that has the top 10 news stories all over the world. And there's even pop culture stuff for people like Neghar, I'm going to bust you, who like to not pay attention to anything when they're creating stuff and then miss pop culture moments. Is that fair to say?
I miss stuff. I turn off. I just and I also miss whole terminology. I didn't know, all of a sudden I started noticing that people were using the term extra. They'd be like, oh, that's so extra. And apparently that had been around for years and I didn't know.
Which is funny because you're totally extra.
I'm so extra. And I had to look it up. on Urban Dictionary.
Oh my God. So Here's, if you're watching on YouTube, you can see it. If not, it's like I don't know, less than a quarter of a page that's gossip, and this is all of like the pop culture for the week. So I love how much time and space is given to that, and that it exists. So if like my mom's reading it, she can see that people are talking about Kanye right now or whatever, and get just the snippet. So I love that in terms of a resource that really is thinking about what are the different perspectives and the importance of consuming all of them, but also in bite-sized nuggets. So if the alternative messages are damaging to you, you're just seeing a snippet of it and not having to delve into a resource that is damaging to your person.
Yeah, and it gives you the option to be exposed. Gives you the opportunity to be exposed to different viewpoints. So I think that's really important. If you know people, if you're listening to this, you're likely like either consider yourself a feminist or you're curious about feminism. So you probably know someone who's like, this isn't for me. I don't need to be a feminist. I don't, I'm not oppressed. I don't believe that women are oppressed, and so on and so forth. That's a great resource. That's a great opportunity to give somebody different viewpoints, because usually what I'm still working on, let me rephrase that. What I'm still working on is compassion. I'm still working on having compassion for the opposition, because I'm trying to understand that the opposition consumes different media, has a different personal experience, maybe doesn't live demographically where they're exposed to oppression. I'm trying to operate under this hyper compassionate viewpoint of benefit of the doubt without assumption. And that is my particular challenge, is to be just angry enough just angry enough to want to fight for what is just, but without personally attacking anyone for their viewpoints. And I think that's really important, because as soon as we as intersectional feminists get out there in the media and in social media and start attacking people who don't share our viewpoints, that is when things become divisive. That is when we give them fuel. We give the opposition fuel to divide us. We give them fuel to attack us, because then they come out in droves and say, see, anytime somebody doesn't agree with you, you come out and you bitch and you moan and you whine and you criticize and you attack. And I think that it's really important for us to try to practice this level of compassion. We can be angry and also be composed.
Right.
I think that that's an important distinction.
Well, and I would put the onus of that particularly on people who are operating with more privilege.
Absolutely.
So if you are a white person who has just figured out that white supremacy is a thing, my husband just said the other day, I don't think anything is being helped by white people yelling at each other on the internet. And I was like, touche. I just want to be careful that we aren't using any language that is tone policing people who are really like demanding that their voice be heard, but rather putting the onus on people who are operating within a position of privilege, that if you have the ear of someone who doesn't even understand why we're having any of these discussions, that you might consider approaching that in a way that is potentially more effective and compassionate, then you're wrong. Especially if you have the emotional energy and privilege with which to do so.
Absolutely. So I think we wanted to talk a little bit about the Women's March. Unless you've been living under a rock,
exactly.
you have likely seen some coverage on the Women's March in some way, shape, or form, and you might even be one of the millions of women across the world who joined a local march. I know Erin and I both did, Erin in Kansas and myself in downtown LA. And we want to talk a little bit about some fair criticisms of the Women's March, how we can get better internally, how we can internally as a movement listen to these criticisms to be more inclusive, to get it right. And we also want to talk a little bit about some really beautiful things that came of this historic movement and how we can move forward.
Yeah, so in doing so, I'm going to step right into a messy area that I don't feel 100% comfortable yet, because I'd like to role model what I'd like that to look like. So one of the fair critiques of the march is that women had these pussy hats made, and that was supposed to represent everyone, and even specifically the people who came up with the pattern for the pussy hats were inclusive of transgender women in their narrative, at least is my understanding of the inception of that. The reason for the name pussy had to do with words that Donald Trump said about touching women without consent, specifically grab them in the pussy without even asking. And a reason for centering that, to me, was about one of the tenets of the march being for upholding reproductive rights, specifically Roe versus Wade and a right to an abortion, which that specific thing is specific to pussy ownership, right? So specifically.
Yeah.
And so a critique of that is that it was erasure of transgender women and centering womanhood around ownership of a vulva, or in this case, we're using the language pussy. And that is, it's a place I'm doing a lot of listening right now, because I understand the value of specifically talking about vulvas, which is something that we're going to do on this show. But then it made me wonder, are we misstepping in some way? And I think that it's important that we talk about that stuff. And so where is that line where we're allowed to be specific about our experience and even specific about our anatomy without excluding other people? And so in my own messy analysis and self-exploration, I don't have an answer to that yet, because I don't want to not talk about our vaginas and still think we're in a place where
I love pussy. I want to talk about pussy.
Neghar loves pussy. Somebody quote her, make a really pretty flowery meme about that.
Yeah.
So, I think it's important that there is space for us to center that. Maybe the answer is that's not at a march that's meant to be for everybody, or maybe, I don't know. I don't have clear answers about that yet. And so that's a place where, instead of saying, how dare you be divisive and critique our pussy hats because they're great, and I didn't personally have a pussy hat, so I'm just looking at objective arguments. I'm not mad at that. It's just something that I hadn't thought about, and I'm still doing some thinking about, so that not just so that I don't get called out, which is a place I think we get in analysis paralysis, but so that I'm not doing any harm in my own work when my intentions are positive but my impact is negative. And so that is a space that I'm doing a lot of exploration myself, because I'm not sure of my own footing and what is helpful and what is damaging that I'm even currently doing around that.
I don't know what the answer is either. I don't know, what the move would have been otherwise to show more inclusivity. I think that the immediate response is, I see you, I hear you, you're valid. And maybe that's it, and maybe a further explanation of, I wasn't doing this to exclude you, and I understand that it did. I understand that it did, and I'm going to keep working to find a way to be better. The pussy hats did serve as a pretty distinct symbol, to the point where, if you missed it, it was recently on the cover of Time magazine. Which to me, that is like, that's a big win for the Women's March and for this movement of intersectional feminism. But if we're missing what intersectional feminism is, then it's easy for people on the outside to even look at that and say that, oh, well, look at them. They can't even get it together within their own organization. They're saying that, all women have vaginas, and that's not exactly true. So I can see this as being a really sticky situation, that if you can hear it in my voice, I'm actually not even really comfortable saying anything concise, because
there's nothing concise to say.
There's nothing concise.
We're listening.
I am for LGBTQ rights. I believe that anyone who identifies as a woman has a right to call themselves a woman. I am very specific, even in I only work with women in my coaching programs, and I'm very specific on my sales pages to say that this program is for anyone who identifies as a woman, not just anyone who was born as a woman. So I am really inclusive in my own personal work, but we're speaking to something much larger than that. So this is a big topic that we need to discuss. And I think that, again, Erin and I don't have the answers. I see why it happened. I see this as a response to Donald Trump's rhetoric. Mm-hmm. And I see all people standing up and saying, this is not okay. Mm-hmm. But, assault against women is not okay. Mm-hmm. A whole bunch of white cisgender men getting together and discussing what's appropriate for women's reproductive rights is not okay. Right. And I see that as being a very important tenet of intersectional feminism, but I also see the other side. And I think that the conversation that we need to have is again, like you said, Erin, like, don't critique us. This is what we were trying to say.
Right.
I think the conversation needs to be, I see you, let's talk.
Right. Because it is important to me that we are talking about things specific to vaginas, including just being comfortable with saying Absolutely. Vagina, and talking about periods and the things that are specific to owning a vagina, right? But then also absolutely don't want to do so in a way that is damaging to someone else. And so I don't know. I'm still working on the language and the process for which that is most effective, for everyone. And then to the conversation, the Donald Trump conversation about grabbing the pussy and standing up for women having the right to not be sexually assaulted and feel safe in their bodies. Transgender people suffer sexual assault at a much higher rate than Absolutely. Cisgender women. So then that's missing. So here we are in a mess where we don't have definitive answers, but really important things to listen to, which is where we're at, man.
It's where we are. And I think that what's going to help unify this movement of intersectional feminism is let's discuss and let's listen rather than fight. Because we have a bigger fight.
Right.
We have a bigger fight. So let's be open. Let's be compassionate. Let's listen to people when they come out and they say, I don't feel like this represents me. Like, sit down and listen.
Right. Because the language that says, to that specific argument, so transgender women are just like dividing us because we were all unified behind a pussy hat and you're dividing us. What that really isn't saying is let's unify. It's saying us first. And that just can't, that's where we've been, and it can't be where we go from here.
I agree.
So we've said everything and nothing, which is about where we're at, I think. But I know that you had something beautiful that America Ferrera said at the march, and I'd love to close on that.
So while we do recognize that there are a lot of criticisms of intersectional feminism, of this movement, of the Women's March, and so on and so forth, I think one of the most beautiful things that can come out of this Women's March and of this big sort of fight against the opposition is that if you are just now waking up, take that and go forth. If you are realizing that you need feminism, that you need social justice, that you need, social activism, that this is something you're being called to do, take that and move forward. Because if anything comes out of this Women's March, we're hoping that it is an uprising of activists. If you are just now waking up, welcome. And let's fucking do this shit together. So America Ferrera, who is who's an actress, you might know her from Ugly Betty. She is the child of Honduran immigrants, and she gave an amazing speech at the Women's March on Washington, and I'd like to share part of that with you. She said, "Together, we, all of us, will fight, resist, and oppose every single action that threatens the lives and dignity of any and all of our communities. Marchers, make no mistake. We are, every single one of us, under attack. Our safety and freedoms are on the chopping block, and we are the only ones who can protect one another. If we do not stand together, march together, fight together for the next 4 years, then we will lose together. Our opposition knows how to stick together. They are united in their agenda to hold this country back and thwart progress. It is in their slogan. So we too must stand united. If we, the millions of Americans who believe in common decency, in the greater good, in justice for all, if we fall into the trap of separating ourselves by our causes and our labels, then we will weaken our fight and we will lose. But if we commit to what aligns us, if we stand together steadfast and determined, then we stand a chance at saving the soul of our country.
Well, I'm just going to go cry for a while now.
True story. I usually go cry for a while after we finish recording.
It's fine. Going and crying for a while is wonderful.
It's fine.
So we hit on a lot of things, and Neghar and I only represent, our unique and very limited points of view for each of us, though coming from different identities, obviously don't represent everybody of our identity either. So this is just an intro conversation to a much bigger one that we are excited is happening on a grand scale, and we're both doing a lot of learning in. So if you have questions, we would love to hear them. If you have specific show ideas you'd like us to cover regarding this, we would love to hear that too. And you can find us, myself is facebook.com/I am Erin Brown, and I'm I am Erin Brown on all social media platforms, and Neghar.
Yeah, I'm also Neghar Fanouni on all social media platforms. And you don't even have to be able to spell that right, honestly. You can just spell anything even close to it, and it comes right up.
Yeah.
And you can find me at negharfanouni.com or Facebook/Neghar Fanouni official. And I just want to close with saying that whether or not you want to label yourself a feminist, an intersectional feminist, a womanist, whether or not you want a label at all, maybe you're not into labels, that's cool too. The goal here with Erin and I discussing this isn't to get you to say, yes, I'm a feminist and to take on that label. It's to open up to a wider conversation, and whatever you call yourself, to have your actions align with your label or with your thoughts or with your intentions.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Well, we'll see you next time. Please let us know what you think. Offer us critique. We're open to it. And we are excited to keep having messy-ass conversations in hopes that we can all learn how to have these conversations better. See you next time.